Steve is an absolute gold mine of information, and I'm sure that came through here. He's also the master of modesty, and we will have time at the end, as you may, well want to ask questions there for him, because nobody knows more about this than our good man Steve. It's great to be with you today. And thanks for coming. There's a lot of power here in this room here. Joel, Steve, Amy, all the way from New York, Dave, so many people involved in these things, my brother Don back there. And so thanks for coming. This is an exciting topic for me, for all of us, I think, when we look at the kinds of opportunities that are out there, kind of on the cusp of a new age with what's been talking about. I wrote a book recently called Finding Chief Kamiakin, which is about a great patriot warrior of the Pacific Northwest. And as soon as I had finished this thing, you always kind of want to have the story told. And then the day it comes out, or actually a week later, I get a call from the librarian at the Ellensburg Library. And he says, you won't believe this, but I see you've been writing about this guy, Chief Kamiakin. He's kind of a legendary person in the Northwest. Maybe if you're from the area, you know this name. He said, we were going through some tape recordings. It was one-room country school teachers 100 years ago, and misfiled in this collection was a recording of Chief Kamiakin's son, Cleveland Kamiakin. Would you be interested in it? So, wow, yeah, I kind of make a beeline over there. And don't report this, I'm probably the most overdue returned book collector and everything else, but he gives me this recording. He said, we put this on, nobody understands a word of this, it's in a totally different language. Long story short, I went to a good elder friend on the reservation, and we put this tape in, and she understood this language, and she related it to me. And it was as if in a moment we were transported back in time, in the century, and because of the stories, even farther back to time immemorial. And the good work that people like Steve have been doing, resurrecting these ancient grains, really transports you in another time, in another place. It's a kind of dimensional experience that I'm not sure you can get in any other way. It's not by listening, necessarily. It's not by talking. It's by tasting. It's another sense we don't always invoke that's associated with the past. Zane Grey came to the Northwest. He's most popular, for all his great Western and thrillers turned into cowboy shows. I think a lot of us watched as a kid. Maybe me anyway. I think I got more gray hair than most of you out there. And I like his reference to the significance of the grains. Material things lost their significance and were seen clearly as he's looking out over this grain field. They could not last, but the grain, the land, the stars, they would go on with their task. By the way, he writes that in the context of a grain field in the Big Bend country down the Ritzville, Odessa area where this novel is set. I'd like to dedicate my remarks today to our father, Don Charmin, and this is our youngest, our oldest daughter, who's I think 34 now, right? So this picture was taken a while ago. This was when the Mount St. Helens explosion took place, and we thought the crop was ruined because it had this seal across the top with an inch of ash. Turned out that it kept all the moisture locked in. So maybe this is what we've had here this last month. Obviously, we're thinking is a good thing. We had the highest yield we've ever had. This is like 3-ton barley, which was a record for us. Well, you're here because you're interested in heritage and landrace grains, so I'm probably preaching to the choir here because of your interest. But if anybody here isn't aware of the distinction, land races come from this German term, Land, and race, a particular strain that, like Steve talked about, is native to a place, so it has developed a flavor profile, an adaptation to the environment, other characteristics that are unique. There were tens of thousands of these as recent as 100 years ago, when the world sort of began turning to commodification, and today we probably You know, I would think probably have less than 50 that command most of the major, certainly wheat crops here in this country, and then probably less than 20. And so they had these unique distinctions. This was common knowledge long ago. We've lost this today, and a lot of us will pick up a loaf of bread or the pancake mix, and you know, it won't even say there what the variety is. You know, a lot of times it won't even say if it's soft white or whole wheat. It'll just say flour, I guess. I know this not because I'm a good cook, because my wife was quite ill a couple years ago, and to show you how desperate we were, I had to cook for a month and a half, and went into the pantry, and I started looking at ingredients of things, and I was stunned by just how bland the descriptions of everything were. But clear back in late medieval, early modern times, you find all kinds of references in literature, in poetry. It's just second nature that you would know perky wheat, gray wheat, turkey wheat, pollard wheats, red wheats. I mean, these are all the colors of the rainbow and all the names of the places that they are. Again, thousands of them. Actually, however, the Northwest was separate from this experience. I have to tell you, the entire continent was separate from this experience. There are no small cereal grains native to North America. Certainly corn, maize, and Midwest and Native American cultures, but that was not true for any small cereal grain. It is thought, historians think that probably on Columbus's third or fourth voyage, grain came as fodder for the livestock, for the horses. And some ultimately planted in Hispaniola in the Caribbean did not do well. Even maybe more moisture and humidity than the Skagit Valley, Steve, I don't know. But, you know, it made its way across Mexico within about 150 years, over to the west coast, and up the El Camino Real. And so by the late 1700s, white Sonora wheat was raised in California along the Jesuit mission trail. It did not penetrate the Pacific Northwest, however. The very first grain that ever came to the Pacific Northwest arrived with this man. He's wearing the top hat here, not exactly farmer-looking quality, but somewhere in here is a keg of grain. And this grain is the white llamas from southern England, where Sir George Simpson, who was the governor of the Hudsons Bay Company, a worldwide, oh, I'm probably supposed to be sitting in one place here. Don's trying to record something.
Don't move around.
I'm a rower. See, I'm an old junior high history teacher, so you got to keep the crowd entertained, you know, you're going to have disaster. And so we have this experience where they're trying to create a self-sufficient food supply out here. This is a long way to send a Big Mac. And he's kind of upset with all the fur traders because they're sending food, they're sending back furs, but they're saying this would work a lot better if you guys could grow your own food. And so in the 1820s, he brings the first grain to the Pacific Northwest. For various reasons here, it's been a complicated week, so I didn't bring all my props. And thanks so much, Steve, because guess what? This is the actual grain. It was a real detective hunt trying to find this, and it would not have been possible without Steve's help. Like Steve said, these are given different names over time, and so you have to track them back with a comparison of the names later that they came by. I was going to prop it up here, but I don't want to break your straw. And so we played the detective game, and we finally sorted back through, and fortunately, there was a farmer in the Willamette Valley growing this as late as about 1910. Actually, this was raised widely even past 1910. But the USDA Germplasm Center, even operating then, sent plant explorers to the Northwest, all over the country, to tell you the truth. And they found a grower who had this about 1910. They collected a single sample, or this would have been lost for all time. I mean, you could get it in Europe, I suppose, but it wouldn't have been what acclimatized here to the Northwest. And so it's exciting to see that. He brought it to, oh well, there were more than just the epicenter of Hudsons Bay trade at Fort Vancouver in those days. But this was his destination. This is where Dr. John McLaughlin had established the premier trading emporium, really, for the Pacific Northwest. But in addition to grains, vegetables, other products were raised there, and they've done a pretty good job of bringing some of these back in a demo farm. I don't want to step on anybody's feelings from Vancouver. It's kind of a Potemkin village because this was all destroyed back in the day, so this is all rebuilt. But my hat's off to them for doing good detective work in tracking down what a lot of those original crops were. More to the point, because we're assembling here in Spokane today, is the fact that when you come across country, if you're going to go to Vancouver and you follow the old Hudsons Bay trails, guess what? You've got to come through here. You've got to come through the inland Northwest, North Idaho, Eastern Washington, Southern British Columbia. And so his track actually came right down this area. And he stopped at, also to deposit grain at Fort Colville. And Fort Colville, you can see here, actually had a grist mill, the first one in the inland Pacific Northwest. I've been trying to, you know, you can lose a lot of things in life, right? And believe you me, I'm an example of losing things. But it's pretty hard to lose a stone from a grist mill. I mean, these things are heavy and big. And so I'm trying to track these. I have been told these are in our state museum, and I have not found them yet, so it'll be fun to see it. Fort Okanagan was also an active post in the mid-Columbia, over if you know where Brewster is. It was a little dry there. They tried grain production, but it was not as fortuitous as what the environment was around Fort Colville. And then if you know where Wallula is, just south of the Tri-Cities, that's actually where the original Fort Walla Walla was located, called Fort Nez Perces in Hudsons Bay days. Later it was relocated to the area presently in Walla Walla. But here along the river, this is the Columbia River on the right, they also had extensive farming areas, quite sandy soil there. And so they found a better environment inland, about 10 to 15 miles down to where today Yuma Pine, Oregon is. And they established what is still today called Hudsons Bay Farm. And so we're working with them to reestablish some of the llamas culture. So this shows you kind of the trading network. When I got into this work, I wrote a book for WSU Press called Harvest Heritage. I had kind of thought that the story of agriculture sort of started with us American pioneers coming out on the Oregon Trail, all that kind of thing. And in fact, no, agricultural origins go back way farther, a generation before this, to these Hudsons Bay days. The oldest building in the state of Washington, I'm happy to report to you, is a granary. And so it was up above Vancouver at what is today Tacoma. Actually DuPont, who was relocated, but this is the actual building. And I kept hoping we'd find some old seeds there embedded, you know, find some of the llamas that way, but no luck. This is down near the Fort Wallula area. And now I'm going to skip through this because I know our time is limited. But some other day, if you want me back, I'm happy to take you all through this. I went through all of the Hudsons Bay journals that I could track down. And I was interested in what happens every month of the year. What are they doing to become self-reliant in what really was a kind of self-sustaining organic land system? And so I'm telling you, it came out incredibly complicated. It was probably, I'm not sure the folks at WSU Press actually wanted to see me for several weeks after, because I insisted they put this in the appendix. And, you know, it's about 2-point type, you know, 2 pages of this. Might give you a headache looking at all the details and when it's done. But if you want to restore a culture that's authentic and shows you the kind of work for livestock, grains, vegetables, it's all there. And yes, you ended the year with a big party. And thanks to Amy, we had one yesterday in our little tiny Endicott because she made pancakes. How do you like that? Flew all the way out here from New York to make pancakes. Thank you, Amy Heller. A couple points. By the way, this is the most popular postcard in the United States in 1910 from right here in Eastern Washington. I should know how many. Yeah, I guess I wrote there. 140 mules in there pulling combines here in Eastern Washington. And this is why we're finding, much like this aspect of bringing back has such relevance and significance for us today. You know, sometimes things go the wrong way when you resuscitate things. I have two grandsons, ages 5 and 6, and guess what? They love dinosaurs, and I kind of do too. And you know, Jurassic Park is a great story of bringing something back, but it kind of goes awry, right? It really didn't benefit us in ways that maybe some thought they could. But look what happens with the land races. First of all, higher mineral levels, and I'll show you a chart of that momentarily. And especially significant are the trace elements, magnesium, phosphorus, and others, that are uniquely suited to aiding the human digestion process. And by taking those out of grains, by taking those out of flour, we're left with a legacy of a lot of digestive disorders today, aren't we? Significant genetic variation. We don't have time to go into this greatly, but it's interesting, and as you may know, those of you that have seen what's happening in other parts of the world with grain markets in recent years, the African grain crop was enormously at risk in the early 2000s because of diseases, and I don't remember the name of the U88 or something, I think it was that rust epidemic, and it was only by going back to a land race they were able to find a strain that they could breed that would resist the disease. Distinct culinary attributes. This is kind of what got me interested. This goes back to going in the pantry when my wife was ill, and I saw it's the same stuff in the pancake mix that's in the French crepe mix, even though they charge you twice as much and put a fancy picture on the cover, and all the other Belgian waffles. I mean, it was all everything. And yet, thanks to good people like Steve and others, I found out, you know, there really was a French crepe grain. There really was an English pancake grain. There really was a Belgian waffle grain. These are all things associated with authenticity, and I'm kind of interested in authenticity. These have great implications for brewing. Brother Don, Joel, and others working here with Palouse Pint and other malting systems, brewing, the whole Link Co-op, trying to get identity preservation is fascinating. This is some work we've been doing up on the Colville Indian Reservation with a different oat group. This is the Lincoln oats. You'll recognize Steve there. We'll give you autographs free of charge. Yeah, we sent some to the White House, and here's Michelle Obama raising some with the kids. Don and I are really interested in turkey red because our ancestors came from Russia. They're German, like Dave's last name here. We like our sauerkraut and baked potatoes, but our people came from Russia, and they brought a grain with them, turkey red. And it was so hard, it was breaking the milling equipment. Actually, I think that maybe is why hammer mills were developed, because they had trouble with them on their earlier equipment. But prior to the 1870s, 1880s, America really had no, what we would consider, bread grain. Bread was made from soft white wheat, so it was very dense, heavy, and of course today almost all bread is made from hard red, and that's what turkey red is. Here you go. You see, pay 3 times as much a pound, put a fancy picture on it, call it crepe mix, and you can buy that. But it's just a generic grain. There really is French to sell. In fact, I think it's up here, Steve. You might have brought this for us. Thank you. Sonora, as I just shared, came up early on. Take a look at this. I know this violates every rule of PowerPoint here with too much information, but I can get this to you later. And we have this coming out of a book with Modernist Cuisine that you can see. But if you notice the blues, the blue values are the highest of all these nutritional trace element amounts that are so important in digestion and overall good health. All of them are highest in the old varieties, landrace, and primitive grains. And now it's not because there's something genetically wrong with modern wheats, but they're bred for greater volume. And so you spread things more widely. You have shorter grains, that means shorter roots. They don't penetrate down to where a lot of the trace elements are. And it has an effect, therefore, upon nutrition. So, approaches to promote sustainable utilization of grains. We seek in forums like here, learning from each other. Many of you have taught me far more than I thought I'd ever learn about this. We're interested in indigenous knowledge from ethnic groups that migrated here, Native American perspectives. By the way, the Sonora is the Native American flatbread grain. And so part of our interest in working with the tribes on this. Featuring the pioneering work that a lot of farmers like you were doing in order to perpetuate Landrace Grains, heirloom varieties, and then associating them with niche markets for development. So these are the kind of things that we're doing and interested in learning with you as we move ahead in this realm. This is a book I did for WSU Press a few years ago. By the way, I just found out this week it's going to be reprinted. We're working on a cookbook too. Actually, this came out in an early prototype. We'll have some others out there soon. And so those are the kind of things we're doing. And grateful for your interest. And if you have any questions here, looks like we got about 5 minutes before we got to adjourn. So Steve, why don't you come on up here, guy? And we'd be happy to respond if you have a thought or two to follow up. Anybody? Yes.
Where can you get is this a flyer or a book or?
You know, it's if you just go online to wsupress.com.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they have a few left. I think they're down to about out, which is why they're going to reprint this very soon. But thanks for asking. Yes, and we have. I think maybe I have 20 more copies of that cookbook. If you want to shoot me an email, you know, I can get that too. I'll leave a few cards up here, by the way, if anybody's interested, but happy to be in touch with you. Anybody else? Yes?
So you mentioned that there were no small cereal grains that were native to North America.
Yes.
But I was always told that wild rice was actually a grain.
You know, that's
it's native.
Yeah, it is. In fact, I know they're doing some great work with rice up here in North Idaho. Hi, thank you. And you are correct, because wild rice is a small grain. It's Great Lakes area, I think, often that area. My focus has kind of been on barley, wheat, oats, and those. But I think you're right. I think rice probably is of that culture. Yeah. Thanks for mentioning it. Amy.
Steve, I wanted to go back to your comment on Josie Baker's comments.
Okay.
And just have you riff a little bit on this enchantment with ancient and heritage and trying to make all of this practical for contemporary growing and contemporary markets.
Well, farmers got to make money to start with. And like I said, you know, its uniqueness is what determines its value. And so if they can find a market for some of these heritage grains, because they don't yield as well as the modern ones. They don't always have the disease-resistant packages you need. I mean, the stripe rust funguses, I mean, they're always changing. I mean, up at Mount Vernon, they like to say we do bad really good. USDA has nurseries up there just for disease, because it's always, never gets very cold and it's always wet. But yeah, there's a uniqueness there. But it doesn't necessarily have to be that. I mean, it's like if somebody likes old cars or something. You like them because they're old. Lots of times, I have one slide I like to use, and I just kind of see a race car and this old Beverly Hillbillies type car. Well, that race car is great on a track where you know, and the road's totally dry, sunny day, but you run into problems, and it doesn't have that. You know, it can't go through mud, and you know, if it starts raining or something like this, it doesn't have that uniqueness that you find in a lot of these land races, these old ones that have been around for a while. And if I can cross that into the new ones, and you get some of that flavor coming to, the uniqueness, the thicker brand, that's what I want to do.
But do you find some market resistance in terms of, you know, if you want
You're trying to stir something up here.
Yeah. I want to figure out how to make it all work. And I see that as a point of problem where people are ready for ancient grains, which is a misnomer in and of itself. I think primitive grains is a great way to say it. You know, bread wheat is actually older than other things. So how can we help this along and correct the assumption? And
what I've run into, I'll just take personal experience, where we work with the commodity market, the groupings in the commodity market. Everything has to do with the dollar. And I've looked at tens of thousands of quality analysis You know, you want a certain loaf volume. You want it to absorb a lot of water. You want, you know, certain mix time. All these different things, but it all has to do with what's going to make somebody else the most money. Never have I seen anything with nutrition. Never anything about flavor. So how do you merge those two things that they can make money on it and commodity thing, and yet have this extra value that we find coming out of some of these old ones? And so that's what I'm hoping, kind of trying to make these modern land races, so to speak. Can we bridge that gap a little bit that way? I don't know. It's tough.
What's your rough breeding process?
We do traditional breeding there. I gave a talk up in Monroe just the other day where we do the crosses, you know, where you just by hand in a greenhouse, emasculate a plant, bring another one to it, and drops the pollen in on it, and you have, you know, a hybrid that way. And then we just do selection out in the field. But that's what I like with this new one we did. They sent it out into early generation in different areas, kind of participatory type breeding they like to call, which the university does not like because they don't get to reap all the money off of it. You know, it's all about the dollar again. But it's what works best for the farmers. And they can then drive that variety the way they want. We actually did this back in the late 90s with the farmer down in Palouse whose son was killed in an accident. And the farmer wanted his granddaughters to be able to take over the farm. In fact, they farm right next to where Dave's family does. Anyway, we helped to make a cross in the greenhouse. She was an 8th grader in FFA. Long story short, we planted it out on the farm. They went out there and would select the ones they liked, get rid of the ones they didn't. Blew it up, and I put it in the variety testing nursery that WSU has, which looks usually about 60 or 70 of the top lines from all the different universities in the area and private companies. It topped one of the nurseries one year. I mean, some of Monsanto, I mean, she's beaten Monsanto, Syngenta, all these huge companies, and they selected her right on the farm. Call it Lexi 2. It was her second try. Her name is Lexi. Anyway, it's a really cool story. But this is what can happen. You know, you can drive it yourself as a farmer and let it do what's exactly best on your farm. And that's the problem they were having in Mount Vernon when I got there. They were looking over at Eastern Washington, what varieties do well in high rainfall. Some of those were the worst ones over there. And the worst ones there were the best ones here. And so that's why you have to try out what works on your farm, not your neighbors, not anybody else. It's really what's on your farm, or as close as you can get to it. So, good question. Long story. I get talking too much.
Great. Yeah, we have a couple minutes yet, because I thought it was going to 11. So 11.
Another question.
Oh, yeah, I was just wondering, when you're testing for disease resistance with these different varieties, are you working with plots that are conventional chemical fungicide, herbicide covered versus like organic with the micronutrients?
I like to do both.
Yeah.
I like to do both. I have a nursery. Usually we don't have as much organic ground up there. And what I do, I usually have to leave for the grad students and their project. This year I do have a nursery, and I want to look at both, and I want to taste both, too. And it comes down to taste. Actually harvest them, we have enough. They can bake some small loaves of bread, and we'll taste it. But yeah, I want genetic resistance. I don't want to have to spray anything on it. I mean, it saves a farmer money anyway.
Right, yeah.
You know, and really some of the organic farmers that I've met with, they're some of the best farmers there. They know every area of their field, what weeds there, what works, what doesn't work, you know.